And welcome to those of you that are gathering in this space right now. I'm so happy to welcome you to this time of conversation and sharing with the Interfaith Amigos. I am Margaret Somerville, and I am one of the leaders of Interfaith Alignment. And if you are new to this space, a very warm welcome. This is a time and a space and a Zoom link that you can always come to. We're here in this space once a week to share prayers and contemplative practices from a different tradition each week in a very simple space of sacred sharing. And Brother Imam Jamal has been a frequent session leader with us over the last few years. We also, besides having our weekly sessions of contemplative practices, once a month we gather on a Wednesday or a Thursday morning if you're in Australia to hear from authors and activists in this space. And then following that, we do something that I think is very special in that we meet on 3 days after we have these monthly talks, so that everyone can be in a very informal setting of interfaith conversation. And I think that's one of the things that's really special about alignment, because there are lots of places where you can go and hear brilliant people sharing their work, but then you go and it goes somewhere, it sits with you, it marinates for a while, and sometimes you don't have the opportunity to share any further about that. So that's one of our commitments, is that 3 days after we meet with whoever our authors and activists are for the month, we all gather again. Or people who couldn't be here live and are going to watch the recording afterwards will gather with us so that we can share in a more intimate time of conversation. So you are all welcome to be in that space as well on Saturday. So it is my absolute delight to be a guest of the Interfaith Amigos, who are a guest with Interfaith Alignment today. And just to give you a little bit of my connection with the Interfaith Amigos, and this was before Rabbi Laura, before you joined the Interfaith Amigos, I was at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and I think that it was the one that was in Salt Lake City in 2015, was that, Brother Jamal?
Yeah, I forget.
And I was there with one of my dearest friends, and we were going through the program for the Parliament of the World's Religions and the hundreds and hundreds of things that we wanted to go to. And we were dividing up, my friend and I were dividing up what we would go to see, because we couldn't make it all. So we would go to something, she would go to something, I would go to something, we would meet back and share what we had heard. And she ticked off that she was going to go hear the Interfaith Amigos. So I need to go hear something else. And she came back and she was glowing with excitement for this conversation that she had witnessed. And she is like, you have got to get in touch with these people and hear this conversation. So my entree into meeting the Interfaith Amigos was through my dear friend. And then I was so grateful to keep getting in touch at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and then to make contact with dear brother Jamal, who started to come and lead sessions for Interfaith Alignment. And now, Rabbi Laura, we're so happy that you are a part of this wonderful group, as 2 of the other amigos have retired, and that you can be here with us today in this space as well. So we will each take a little time to be in conversation, see what happens going back and forth, see what comes up, and then hopefully get you all involved in the conversation as well as you wish, perhaps even just in the chat. But as we settle into this space right now, please know that you are most welcome, all of you in this space. We are glad you are here. And you are welcome to put in the chat where you're coming from in this world. If there's any tradition in particular that you align with, that you would like us to uplift, and if there is land on which you reside that you would like to honor in this space. Any thoughts that come up or anything that is sitting on your heart, please do as well, put in the chat. So there are two words that I have been thinking about recently, and I asked our friends here if maybe we could be in conversation around these words, if that feels comfortable. And one that I'm struggling with right now is unity. And that seems like a very confusing word to be struggling with, as it is something we strive for. But in my space with what I do, I feel as if unity can be confused in some ways. So I was raised Presbyterian. I was ordained as a Presbyterian minister. I am now an interfaith minister and the founder and one of the leaders of this interfaith organization. And people often confuse being someone who is in interfaith work with someone who wants all traditions to be one. And they confuse unity with this understanding of wanting to be one. When in actual fact, those of us, most of us who are engaged in interfaith work, do not want us to be one in terms of our beliefs and practices. We want to celebrate and honor and uphold and value our differences. So that is why the word unity is sometimes a little tricky and a little confusing. We are one in spirit. We are one in intention of love and peace and justice for all beings in this world. But we're not one in terms of where we've come from necessarily, or the paths that we're taking. So along with thinking about unity tonight, perhaps in this space, I'd like us also to think about what appropriation is, and when we might be stepping on the toes of another tradition in terms of our interfaith work, or taking something that isn't ours and not using it in an appropriate way. So I am putting that out there, thinking about what unity is and thinking about what appropriation is as we engage in some conversation. And Brother Jamal, I would ask you if you would like to share some thoughts with us now.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sister Margaret, for this opportunity to be, as I always say, in these rectangles of love. And I'm borrowing from Rumi, for those who haven't heard me say this numerous times before. I love his utterance when Rumi says, please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. So you see, there's total unity and there's no appropriation. It's just perfect. So I'll start with a chant. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. La ilaha illallah. In the name of God, who is boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. There is no God but God, meaning it's all one. We are all one. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. One more time. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. I want to start by quoting Hans Kung, the late Hans Kung. I don't know if you remember or know him. Very wonderful Swiss theologian, who said that there can be no peace among nations unless there is peace among religions. And I love the verses in the Quran that says that if Allah wanted, Allah could have made all of us one single community, but God created diversity, and it mentions religions, culture, races, gender, for one primary reason. So you might come to know the other on a human level. So Margaret, you mentioned unity, we mentioned the diversity of religions, cultures. The best way to attain to unity in a harmonious, loving way is to really enter into friendship, as the Quran says, to come to know the other on a human level. I, as a Muslim, I know that this is very essential. 9/11, so much of Islamophobia. And I remember there was a Gallup poll, I think it was, that asked the citizens in every state in America, would you want a mosque to be built in your state? Over 60% said absolutely no, not never. Only 20 to 25% said, yes, I'm okay with that. So that was not very good news. But here's the good news. Every single one of those 60% who said no, each one said, I don't even know one Muslim personally. And the 20 to 25% who said, I'm okay with the mosque in my state, said, I know at least one or two or maybe more Muslims on a personal level. So creating this friendship is very critical. We know that if there is a heart-to-heart connection or a human connection with the other, could be as a Muslim with a Jew or a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu, no matter what my biases are. I know we all have tribal affiliations. We have human conditioning. But if we get to know the other on a human level, then it becomes very difficult to demean or demonize the other. So in my ministry, for a long time, some of my best friends are people who are actually, in a sense, Islamophobic, very right-wing Christian evangelicals, very conservative, but because I have a personal relationship with them, they're able to override that, and they've been of tremendous help to me. Okay, very quickly, I want to my first point was the capacity to create friendship. And if there's friendship between religions, it can't be superficial. So it has to be an authentic friendship where I get to know the other. The main complaint about especially monotheistic traditions who talk so much about interfaith, they only meet during Seder or Christmas, or now it's Ramadan. And in those get-togethers, the complaint is that the behavior is absurdly nice. But once they go home, Muslims become terrorists, Jews become occupiers, Christians become liars, unless this has led to some people from the different religions to frequently get together to come to know the other, then that gives rise to something very, very fruitful. So authentic friendship is very important. I'm looking at the time. Let me just make one quick other point about appropriation you mentioned, Sister Margaret. It's wonderful to study other religions. Mahatma Gandhi said, if you really want peace in a multi-religious society, if you authentically really want peace in a diverse community, let's say different religions, it is your sacred duty to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religions. I might say I am non-prejudiced. Gandhi would say, what are you non-prejudiced about? You have to make the effort to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. I love the words of Houston Smith, the late professor of comparative religion, and he mentioned the Quran. He said, you can look at the Quran from one angle, but if you look at the Quran from the angle by studying Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, you can look at the same Quran from different angles. You'll have a much deeper understanding of the Quran. That's why we say interfaith is not about conversion, it is about completion, about embracing different spiritual practices. I borrow a lot. For example, in my meditation, I do centering prayer, I do chakra meditation, I do Tonglen, some other meditative practices I do also. In my chanting, in my zikr, I chant from the languages and the religions of diversity, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. So I think in terms of appropriation, I think the most important thing is when I learn an insight or I do a practice from another tradition, it's important I do it with humility, with gratitude, and not with a sense of ownership. So I'm not an expert in that. I'm just acknowledging that when I'm using those insights and practices, it makes me a better Muslim and a more developed human being. You know, Rumi would say, you might learn a few bird calls, but that doesn't make you an expert on the chirping of birds. And I read one today, I wrote it down from Rumi. Rumi said, you may learn to imitate a bird, but do you experience what the nightingale feels for the rose? So that's just an imitation. Can I, with gratitude, with humility, sincerity, learn and grow from the insights and practices of other traditions without appropriating, meaning I don't claim to be an expert on that or that I own it. I have just blossomed by practicing them. Sister Laura, that's the end of my sermon. Time for your sermon.
Well, thank you so much, Jamal. That wasn't long at all. You could continue if you wanted.
No. I purposely kept it short because I want to have everybody involved.
I was thinking about your bird metaphor, and I thought it's true that chirping doesn't make you a bird, but it can help you make friends with a bird.
True.
You're curious, the bird is curious, comes
Yes.
down to check you out. You're safe, and the relationship continues. I have not met people here before. I'm Rabbi Laura Duhan-Kaplan. My current job is I'm Dean of the Jewish Renewal Seminary. Before that, I was Director of Interreligious Studies at the Vancouver School of Theology. Before that, I was other things, including a synagogue rabbi. And I will tell you about the first time that I met the Interfaith Amigos because that does become relevant to what I would like to say. This was, almost 20 years ago. The Interfaith Amigos were invited to Vancouver, Canada, to do a program. And as part of their program, they came to visit the local Jewish Christian dialogue group. That was a clergy group that I was part of. And it happened to be that my younger child, who is now 30, my younger child, their school had a professional development day for the teachers, which they packaged as Bring Your Child to Work Day. So my child came to work with me, which that day happened to be the Interfaith Amigos seminar. And we watched as two of the local rabbis got triggered by the interfaith discussion and sort of hijacked it to have a conflict with one another. And Imam Jamal, Pastor Don, and Rabbi Ted did a fabulous job mediating and moderating the conversation. But I remember that afterwards, my child came home with notes because they were supposed to take notes on what they learned, with a complete interpersonal analysis of all of the characters and how they were interacting and how the conflict resolution worked, which I still hold precious such that even a 12-year-old could see the expertise with which the three of you worked. So I appreciate that. And Margaret, I really appreciate you inviting us and posing these big questions about unity and friendship and appropriation. So I'd like to say just a little bit about unity, something about friendship, and something about appropriation. Unity is a huge concept. It can be looked at from so many different directions. We could look at unity as an ideal that we bring to interfaith dialogue or interfaith relationship, interfaith collaboration, but we can bring it in so many different ways. We can bring unity by coming to it with a kind of universalist perspective, where we already assume that all religious traditions have something in common, say that we all reach in our own way to connect with spirit, capital S, the divine, capital D, the higher power, the God. And when we do that, we enter the relationship already with a feeling of kinship. The dangers, of course, are that we imagine that what all the traditions have in common is what's most important in our tradition. So listening is always important. But there are other ways of approaching with unity as well. We can, under the banner of unity, also be a pluralist and come together with the assumption that everyone is going to be different. And our posture is going to be that we welcome you into this circle of listening and getting to know one another. We don't make assumptions about what we have in common, but we have a unity of a different kind, a unity of purpose. That is, we're here to learn what is new and what is unique. And of course, there are dangers in that as well, in focusing on difference rather than unity. And this is where friendship comes in, right? That there is something important in a quality of relationship that goes beyond whatever your thought model is and the way you are understanding theologically what's going on. And here I want to disagree with Jamal a little bit about friendship. Jamal said that friendships need not to be superficial. I think in some situations, it's okay if friendships are superficial. I have a close friend who is a scholar on friendship. I lean a little toward the academic. That's the bulk of my work. And together we put together this scholarly anthology called Multi-Religious Reflections on Friendship. And one of the ideas put forth by my friend Anne-Marie Ellithorpe is the idea of civic friendship, that we are all together in this community that we want to make work. And some of the ways we'll be friends are we just collaborate side by side on a shared project that makes our community a better one. Whether it's around save the trees, feed the hungry, whether it's around make the city safe against racism, respond to hateful graffiti, create interfaith organizations to respond to overzealous police actions. There are so many things that we can do together. Even if people come together just for those specific projects and they never end up inviting each other into their homes or becoming such intimate friends that they know each other's heart, they are still living into a kind of friendship, what my friend Anne-Marie calls civic friendship. That is, we recognize how interdependent our community is, and we take steps to be there together. Now, that doesn't always happen with perfect unity. When you get together people who are different and have to figure out how to operate together, sometimes we have conflicts, sometimes we disagree. Sometimes even people in the same religious tradition will disagree with one another. That is certainly happening in the Jewish community now, as we are splitting into at least two ways of looking at Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, as we are looking at two or more distinct ways of responding as kind of a world religious community to increasing economic inequality, to splits between liberal and conservatives. Real questions of unity are coming up. And some of the skills that really help us are the skills that we have learned in interfaith dialogue and learning from and with and working together with people who come from different backgrounds and see the world in different ways. I haven't thought of a good transition from those ideas to talking about appropriation, but I will say something about cultural appropriation, which I have learned about a lot with some of my Indigenous teachers. And here's what I've come to in myself. There are some cases of cultural appropriation that are horrific and abhorrent. And I am thinking of situations where one group comes in and invades another group and says, I'm going to take your art, I'm going to take your possessions, I'm going to take your culture, I'm going to take your ideas and make them my own, and then I'm going to kill you. That is the worst limiting case of cultural appropriation. Many other things that we call cultural appropriation can be understood as good faith attempts to learn from one another that went wrong, or good faith attempts that made sense in one context. For example, you and your friend in your living room or around your kitchen table created a beautiful holiday ritual that takes a little from this tradition and a little bit from that tradition. It works in one context. But then when you show up in your community and you try to lead this hybrid ritual that comes from the different traditions, and somebody says, whoa, wait a minute, you're not qualified to present something so precious to Christians, for example. How do you respond? In that context, the way that you have shown up with it may cross a line into cultural appropriation. And one of the really important things to do when you're in a fraught area with a lot of ambiguity is to remember to ask. Right? Do you mind, friend, if I bring what we did together to my community? And your friend may say, that's absolutely fine. You can tell them you received permission. Or your friend might say, if I'm there doing it with you. Or they might say, no, this was just private between us. But context matters. And what's important, I think, is to train ourselves to ask before we act. And those are a lot of thoughts all jumbled together, some of them sending us thinking and feeling in happy directions and some in more challenging directions. And I acknowledge that. And I also thank you, Margaret, for opening with really hard questions.
Thank you. I'm so grateful. And I think there's a little thread weaving here for me between what you were talking about with friendship and then appropriation. And I feel that in terms of the mandate that we have in our different traditions to love the neighbor, to love the sojourner, to love the stranger. And I hear that in us talking about those deep friendships that we share, but also those civic friendships that we share. Is that neighbor my beloved one, or the sojourner, the person who has come to my land and is now a part of me in that way? And that mandate in our faith traditions. I'm thinking of right now in terms of the fact that those who are Christian today are beginning the period of Lent. Ramadan is beginning, these periods of humble reflection and preparation. And our period of Lent ends after the 40 days of with a day called Maundy Thursday, which is, Maundy means the day that was mandatum, mandated, with that commandment to love the other, to love the sojourner, to love the neighbor. That is our commandment that Jesus leaves us with as he's leaving us in the way that he's been with us. And on that day, he is sharing his Passover Seder with his disciples. And then that becomes our Christian witness to sharing communion at the table. In my Presbyterian tradition, we would say communion. Others may say Eucharist. But before I became an ordained Presbyterian minister, I longed in ordination to be the one that was able to offer communion to congregants. And before I was ordained, while I was still in seminary, while I was working as a youth director in the church where I was able to do everything in ministry. I was able to preach and offer prayers and do visitations and pastoral work and education. I was able to do everything except serve communion. I was not allowed to serve communion until my ordination. And so it was something I longed for, because for me, being at the table, sharing at the table, was the heart of my being, sharing at the table. And so I was ordained. And so, yes, it was just so deeply, deeply moving for me to be sharing at the table, to be the one calling other people to the table, until it wasn't comfortable anymore, until it was not comfortable anymore. Because I felt as if there were people excluded from the table. And in my tradition, we say, this is not our table. This is the Lord's table. This is Christ's table. But it's not, to me, it wasn't, I didn't feel comfortable saying this is the Lord's table. This is Jesus' table. Jesus calls us to the table. Because, yes, Jesus was calling us to his table of Seder and to breaking his Passover bread. But who was I to be a Christian saying this is now Christ's table? When for me, the heart of calling somebody to the table was the heart of what interfaith is, as all coming to the table, as all coming to the table. So I had a really moving moment where I was, again, it was at the Parliament, maybe when I first came across the Interfaith Amigos. And I was sharing in one of the practices in the morning, the beginning of the day, before all the meetings would start. We shared in practices, and I went to a room where there were Jewish Kohenet priestesses sharing bread and wine for the service. And I'm sitting there with my discomfort, feeling as if I had appropriated this ceremony in the ways I welcome people to Christ's table. Thoroughly appreciating being in this space with these Kohenet these Jewish priestesses. And then there were so many people in the room that they ran out of bread and wine in a very non-loaves and fish kind of moment. And so they went to the ceremony that was happening in the next room over, which was Wiccan priestesses who were sharing bread and apple juice in a ceremony. And they said, hey, we've run out of bread and wine. And the priestesses, the Wiccan priestesses, says, we got plenty. And so the groups came together and everyone was sharing breads of different varieties and fruits of the vine and the juice of fruits of different kinds. And my heart just opened up and I felt this is it. This is sharing at the table. And I felt deeply blessed by that. So that's just a lot of thoughts to try to weave together that mandate of friendship, which is at all levels, from our most beloved ones that we are taught to love as ourselves, to the sojourners in our land, to being at the table. And in many ways, I hope that this feels like being at the table, sharing our bread with one another. So to you too.
And if I may just add one word, sorry, go ahead.
No, you first.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Well, that's just a really beautiful story, Margaret, of that sharing that can happen in a space like the Parliament. And one of the things I love about the Parliament of World Religions is that after I've gone to so many academic conferences where everybody keeps their head down and barely networks, to come to the Parliament where everybody is there to meet people who are different and to learn from them and share with them. You walk into the space and all kinds of strangers are greeting you and inviting you to join them. And it's just a really beautiful space to facilitate that kind of sharing that you saw. I want to say a couple things from biblical tradition. One is to not worry about appropriating bread and wine for communion from the Jewish tradition of bread and wine at the Shabbat table, because our tradition comes from the story of Melchizedek, who mysteriously appears in Abraham's path, is identified as a priest of the highest God, no cultural or national affiliation whatsoever. His only affiliation is with the Holy One, and he serves bread and wine. So it comes into our tradition as a universal symbol of feasting together in the presence of the divine. So I think what you experienced at the Parliament is just such a beautiful reconnection with that founding story of the ritual.
Thank you.
Sure, I have more to say, but yeah.
Before Brother Jamal, you come in here, I just share something that might be of interest to some people who are regulars to alignment that I did not find out until the book that just came out this September, When Prayer Doesn't Work, and I wrote about that in the book, that one of the Wiccan priestesses who was sharing that with me was Morgana, who is perhaps well known from the Netherlands here to some alignment people. And I had no idea that I would connect with her 10 years later in working with the Charter for Compassion. So just another beautiful thread that wove together there.
I just wanted to just make two general points that from what we have said so far, for me, two things stand out. One is the ability, the capacity to really enter into friendships. Doesn't matter who the other person is in terms of their views, their levels of liberal or being conservative. But if I can somehow manage to, through sincerity, through persistence, through humility, to connect with the other one and just share stories of our human life. I love that wonderful insight by the Christian writer. This universe is made out of stories, not atoms. Once we have that bonding, it organically creates that inner spaciousness where we can connect with the other and really focus on, projects of social justice issues, like Sister Laura was mentioning, or work on some earth care. Once that connection is made, now we can argue about the level of connection, but if it creates the inner spaciousness, then I've noticed from my own ministry, it doesn't matter what the differences are theologically or politically. We'll get together and help the marginalized or work for the homeless. That's one point I wanted to make. Can I, as a human being, connect with the other and create friendship? Number two is, it doesn't matter how much of legislation there is, dialogue there is, unless we do the inner inconvenient work. I'm talking about spiritual practices to become more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, Allah-like. It won't work. Let me just give you the example I give all the time. That wonderful scientific advisor to President Carter who said that, for 30 years, I thought the biggest environmental problems were, climate change, loss of biodiversity, ecosystem collapse. And with 30 years of good science, we could take care of it. He says, now I've realized the biggest environmental problems are not loss of biodiversity, ecosystem collapse, climate change. The biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, apathy, indifference. So it doesn't matter whether you call it appropriation or you are, you follow one particular religion or you're spiritual but not religious. It is critical we do those practices where we evolve into becoming, in my case, a better Muslim and a more evolved human being. To me, that is the key. Questions, comments from others, please jump in.
It's so beautiful. I'm so grateful to you both. I'm thinking back to when alignment first began, and before it was in this form that it is now. We were meeting in the church where I was the associate pastor, and there's someone here who will remember this. We had a program that we called Interfaith Contemplative Practices at the church. And we invited, we had a series of a few months each year where we invited the neighboring faith leaders from different traditions to come into the space, and we shared a vegetarian meal. And then we shared an hour of dialogue. And then we engaged in a half hour of practice together. And when I was arranging for the different faith leaders to come and lead us in these sessions, my prompt to them was not to come in and share for an hour about your faith tradition, about what you believe, the tenets of your faith, but to share with us how you practice your tradition, how you practice, and how that informs your lives. And then that last half hour became engaging in those practices together. And I think that made all of the difference. It wasn't an educational, informational time about, now let's learn about Islam, and now let's learn about the Baha'i tradition. But how are you praying? How are you preparing for prayer? How are you living your life according to those practices? And it was so beautiful. And I think it made all the difference in creating those bonds of friendship that we could practice together. And actually, after the first year of that was when there was the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And our congregation, they all went straight over to the shul where one of the rabbis had been in practice with us in this program. And they went into the space, and the words felt familiar to them, and they weren't afraid to be in the space. And that's what I hope alignment is all about, is that we can share one another's practices, we can share these conversations, so that when we need to be with our siblings, we're not afraid. We're not afraid to step into their space, because we don't know if we're supposed to put our head to the ground, or we don't know if we're supposed to speak in a different language, or we don't know how we're supposed to do it, but we can be together.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. If I may just quickly add, also, when you become friends with the other or others who are totally different, but you really connect on a human level, then we are willing to be vulnerable. So, for example, we've talked about all those beautiful practices, which I really love, sharing the experiences. But we've also found in our ministry, when we connected with the other, became good friends, again, totally different viewpoint, then we began to talk about the problems in the institution of religion, exclusivity, violence in our scriptures, unequal status of women, homophobia. But because we are friends, it's not all those different areas where religion goes astray in your religion, but in my religion. Because we're willing to be vulnerable. And that made for a beautiful conversation, but only came after friendship.
Well, I'll add a third thing. Margaret, you talked about how important interfaith is in laying the groundwork for being able to show up with and for each other. And Jamal, you talked about learning a whole array of spiritual practices and rituals that can help us in our development, and also make it safe for us to talk with someone who might even be more neutral and a better listening partner than someone in our tradition when we want to talk about what is not going well and what does not sit well with us. A third one is to know enough about each other so that people with less than positive intent who want to use religious difference to divide us have a hard time getting away with it. When somebody says, vote for me because I'll get rid of them and raise your profile, and I'll get rid of them because they're this and that. And you know very well they aren't this and that. And in fact, you don't want to get rid of them. And maybe there even is no them in this situation. But when you have these relationships, whether they're deep, intimate, personal relationships or just the experience of working together on something you care passionately about, you know more, and you can't be divided in that way.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's the places where we need to be in action that are not isolated by faith tradition. When we're on the street, not in our individual communities, that's where we are not divided.
You know, I love the point you made, particularly about listening, because a key component of interfaith dialogue is really to sincerely, authentically listen. You know, I love the utterance of Rumi, who said, "What is listening? Listening, metaphorically, is putting your head on the person's chest and just sinking into the answer. Putting your head on the person's chest and sinking into the answer." If I do that with everybody I agree or disagree with, there would be so much more harmony. The second point you mentioned about different forms. In every interfaith dialogue, particularly which is adversarial, we always start with silence, because there's no such thing as a Jewish silence or Islamic silence or Hindu silence, just silence. And that helps a lot.
Well, I have a little song clip, if that's okay.
Oh,
Yes.
please.
And by clip, I mean excerpt that I'm going to sing.
Oh, thank you, Mom.
Margaret's comments about the table, whether it's specifically a communion table or just I think about the more expansive table that everyone is invited to, and the virtual table that we create here in this room with each other. But this is just a little excerpt from a song called At the Table by gospel great Richard Smallwood, who sadly died very recently. And he was friends with one of my bandmates in the Interfaith Music Project. And this is just one of Maestro Smallwood's great songs. Come on in where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on. Come on in where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on. Joy is here where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on. Peace is here where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on. Love is here where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on. So I feel interfaith work is a feast.
Yes.
Everything that we can share with each other and enjoy is a feast that's available to all. So that's
And maybe
what I
all participate in music and dances of universal peace. Maybe boogie woogie for God. Just have fun.
Have we seen you dance?
Oh, the whirling dervishes. I love that.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yes.
Oh,
I
And just ecstatic dance to the music. And music is universal. I love the words of Rumi, who says, what is music? Music is the sound of the spheres. And we have been part of this harmony before. And all this music and dance keeps our remembering fresh. We just have to remember who we are, where we came from. We've always been singing and dancing.
mm-hmm.
And I was in a meeting with Brother Jamal and Swami Amano last week, was it? And we ended it with dancing, didn't we?
That's right. Brother Arun was, very, very Amano. He's Amano now. Yes, very instrumental in getting us up and just moving around.
And I was at a zikr a few days ago, and we were whirling.
Ah, how beautiful.
Just-
And how beautiful, this dances of universal peace. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's held in many places, particularly in places where there's conflict. Israel, Palestine, in those days, Soviet Union. But the person who really created this dances of universal peace from the Islamic tradition, then he's taking chants and music from different traditions. His name is Samuel Lewis. He's actually a Jewish person who became a Muslim. And he says, let's all dance together, particularly in areas of conflict. That'll bring so much more peace rather than wrangling, debating, talking. Let's just have music and dance. So I really love that. We do this very often in our community, dances of universal peace.
Very difficult for the English, let me tell you.
Well, I've got to tell you, every Shrove Tuesday, Mardi Gras, I get a text from my daughter saying, what is your practice that you're taking on for Lent? And I texted her back last night and I said, I'm going to dance every day.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So that is my Lent practice.
And talking about interfaith, I mentioned Samuel Lewis, the Jewish person who established. He's called a Jufi. He's Jewish and Sufi.
Yep.
We have a lot of those in our movement.
Beautiful.
I'm thinking we maybe came to the end of our time, but I'm so tempted after what Francesca said to tell some stories about magical interfaith things that happened around food.
Please do.
Okay, I'll just tell two. One of them was when I was teaching a class, a seminar, sort of at the end of an interfaith studies program. And one of the students who was Hindu said, on the spur of the moment, we're all invited to um, lunch at an interfaith children's meditation retreat. So I will tell you that for the school where I was teaching, we usually defined interfaith as Jewish, Christian, and Muslim because it's a Christian school and because those are sort of the organized communities in Vancouver proper. So the class on the spur of the moment decided we would go to this interfaith children's meditation event lunch. We got in the car and we drove to Surrey, which is a suburb of Vancouver, one town over, with a really different cultural makeup. And the interfaith group was Hindu, Buddhist, and Sikh.
Mm.
And we came in and we were served, of course, a delicious South Asian type meal with abundant food. And some of the children spoke with us, but they were mostly interested in playing with each other. But some of their parents talked with us, and we spent time with some people who were raised as Hindus without a lot of connection with Buddhist tradition, who had just been to a week-long Buddhist meditation retreat, and how learning these new ways of seeing yourself and being with yourself had opened up just incredible keys of understanding of who they were and the ability to access, right, some of the bliss and the joy, even in difficult times. And while we could have had this conversation outside of a meal, we would not have gone if somebody hadn't said to us, come join us for this free lunch at this special event. So not only were our minds blown to suddenly be dropped into a different interfaith landscape in the next town over, but to hear people also testifying to how much they learned. And the other story I want to tell happened in our synagogue. We would have a potluck meal every Saturday after services. It was open to members of the community, but it wasn't advertised. If you knew about it, you could come if you were hungry. We had some street people and addicts in recovery who would come regularly. They'd come for a few months, they'd disappear. There was one woman who started coming. She would come for the lunch only, and then for a few months later for the last 5 minutes of the service, and then lunch, and eventually the whole service, and then lunch. And one day she stopped coming, and we were all very worried about her. She'd come faithfully for maybe 3 years. We were worried about her, and I got a call a few months after we last saw her from somebody who said, "Hi, I want you, you don't know me, but I am the executor of Doris's estate." Doris was a multimillionaire. She loved community meals. She thought this was an amazing thing to have in the community. She went to them of all faith traditions. That was her practice. And oh, by the way, in her will, she specified that $2 million should be dispersed to children who have been harmed by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And would I please work with a partner to disperse it?
Oh, gosh.
And she connected with us over the community meals. So that was a pretty amazing
Wow.
story.
Wow.
I should have just led with that one.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing those.
You're welcome.
Yeah, at the table. At the table. Thank you, my friends, for sharing at this virtual table.
Thank
I'm
you.
really very, very
Thank
grateful
you.
for you being here and sharing this time with us, and to all of you who have been here with us in conversation. And you all are most welcome to share this video with friends and to invite them to conversation on Saturday, if anyone is able. We'll be meeting at 11 Pacific time, and that is 2 p.m. Eastern time and 7 p.m. in the UK. To all of you, great gratitude. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your friendship.
Thank you.
I'm so
Thank
grateful.
you. Shalom, salam,
Well,
peace, namaste.
Salam.
Thank you all for being here.
Yes.
See you all.
Bye-bye.